Could you faithfully serve under each of the past 4 presidents? Could you do it? Could you find favor with each of the last 4 presidents, regardless of their party or whatever they were trying to do in the country? Do you think you could be so incredibly above reproach and so incredible with your character that regardless of who came into power and who was doing what, they'd say, no, you have to stay. You've got to be in my cabinet. You've got to be part of my administration. Do you think you could do it? Because that's essentially what Daniel did. Well, here's how the story starts. We're going to start in verse 1 of Daniel 6. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom. These are like governors, local governors, and they have 3 administrators over them. These are like overseers for the governors. And one of those administrators was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. And what happens when someone's granted favor? Well, his coworkers thought a lot of that. Here's what they did. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in the conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and he was neither corrupt nor negligent. And finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. So much happens here. We're going to break some of this down. The scripture says that Daniel so distinguished himself. The king had planned to set him over the whole kingdom because he was so incredibly diligent. He was so incredibly above reproach. He had not given in to corruption. His faithfulness had earned him favor. And by the way, whatever setting you're in, your faithfulness, your trustworthiness, your unwillingness to go into a corrupt ways of living and carrying out your job, they can earn you favor too. But of course, that favor that he had earned put a big old target right on him. See, Daniel was sort of unique, and I'm not going to get into a whole lot of church history, but just to give you the background, Daniel had served under 4 different kings, 4 different leaders. Nebuchadnezzar was the first one, and that's the person who had taken Daniel's people into captivity, into Babylon. So literally, he had served under this king who had made him a prisoner. He had also served under Belshazzar, who had promoted him to his current high rank, despite some negative things that Daniel said about his kingdom. Darius the Mede, who is mentioned here that Daniel's talking to right now. And later it would be Cyrus the Persian. But each administration, each king was different. They all had different ideas of how to run the kingdom. They all had different priorities, different people they liked, different circles they ran with, different things they wanted to build. But Daniel consistently won favor. He consistently was able to rise above the politics and to stay out of the corruption every single time. Time to get a few people mad. Could you faithfully serve under each of the past 4 presidents? Could you do it? Now you might say, well, it's a different time. It was much more easy then because it was one king and one ruler. It was easy. No. If you were in the wrong camp, they shot you, they executed you, they put you with arrows, they got rid of you. That's the climate Daniel's in. The Babylonians didn't play. They got rid of you. That's what he's dealing with. Could you find favor with each of the last 4 presidents, regardless of their party or whatever they were trying to do in the country? Do you think you could be so incredibly above reproach and so incredible with your character that regardless of who came into power and who was doing what, they'd say, no, you have to stay. You've got to be in my cabinet. You've got to be part of my administration. Do you think you could do it? Because that's essentially what Daniel did. How did he do that? He stayed trustworthy. He kept his integrity. He stayed out of damaging situations. He didn't get caught up in rampant corruption. He wasn't negligent. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't out for himself because he had put God in charge. hope that it teaches you and teaches me that our faithfulness can make us stand out even in places that don't share our faith. The things that come from serving God will stand out. And I think that's something you all need to hear and I need to hear in today's political climate, because you can be loyal to your country and loyal to Christ. Christ comes first, but you can be loyal to both. You can honor leaders you don't agree with. It can be really hard, but you can do it. You can serve well in places that aren't pursuing God the way you are, because your Christianity isn't measured by how loudly the argument goes or how loudly you argue your side. It's by how closely you follow Christ. That's how your Christianity is measured. How are you following Christ? What have you done with Christ? Now, there are times to stand up for your faith, to be bold, to make a statement. There are times to not be silent. But if all you're doing is yelling all the time, if all you're doing is carrying on and making a scene, people eventually tune you out. But if you just faithfully do the things that you say you do, if you faithfully follow God, if you maintain your integrity, if you consistently put your faith first, people are far more willing to listen even when you whisper. But we also see something else going on here. Daniel's enemies couldn't find fault in Daniel's work, his professional pursuits. So they had to attack something else. They had to attack his worship. So these administrators, these satraps, they put their heads together and they thought, man, what are we gonna do with this guy? Nothing he does is wrong. He fills out every form. He dots every I. He does everything right. What are we gonna do? We have to attack something else. We have to attack what he believes. What makes him the core of who he is? Let's attack that. You ever felt this in your life? Like you're doing everything right at work. You even are helping your coworkers. You're doing all the right things. And for some reason, somebody has it out for you. And you don't get it. You're saying, well, all I'm doing is doing my job and I'm doing it really well. And they still want to come after you. It doesn't make sense. I think that's what Daniel was feeling here. But anyway, these guys, they get together and they say, I know what we're going to do. We're going to get Daniel. We're going to put together a law that's going to forbid prayer to anyone but King Darius. They think this is a great idea. So they work on this and they go to the king and they say, hey, we all decided, all the administrators and all the satraps. Now remember, Daniel was an administrator. So they probably didn't include him, but they said they did. They said all the administrators, all the satraps, we got together and we agreed that there should be a law that for the next 30 days, people shouldn't pray to or worship anything or anyone except you. Except you, King Darius. Because you're the GOAT. You're the greatest of all time. I mean, if someone doesn't bow to the GOAT, then they should be thrown to the lions. That's what we think. And so the king, he thinks about this for a while and he says, yeah, I am the greatest of all time. I like this law. So he thinks about it and he's going to sign it into law. So this is going to become the new law of the land. And there's a funny thing here about the laws of the Medes and the Persians, who Darius is ruling here. Once they sign a law, it's done. Even the king cannot change the law. It is in place and it is done. The king was believed to speak for the gods or as a god, and the gods wouldn't have changed their mind, so Daniel's fate now is sealed. You know, sometimes the hardest moments in your life of faith will come to you not because of something you did wrong, but because of something you are doing right. When your integrity threatens insecure people, you can expect opposition. When your integrity challenges other people's integrity, expect opposition. You are following a high standard in Jesus Christ, and it stands out, and others feel threatened by that. And it shouldn't come out of a place of pride. It should come out of service. But we often assume that if we serve God faithfully, life will go smoothly. We may not ever say that. We might in fact say the opposite. We might say, well, we know that bad things happen to good people. We understand that. But deep down, when it's hard, you start to say, I don't understand. I'm doing everything right. Why is my life so hard? Well, sometimes your faith will invite a challenge. And when it does, it's not a sign that God has left you or that you're doing all the things wrong. It's a sign that he's going to trust you with the test and he's going to go through it with you. But how did Daniel respond to his test right now? Here's what it says in Daniel 6:10. Now, when Daniel learned that the decree, that this law had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows were open to Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. This verse is where we see Daniel's aptitude for gratitude really start to shine. 3 times a day, he was willing to get down on his knees, take a position of humility, give thanks, and pray. 3 times a day, just as he had always done before. And you say, Daniel, didn't you understand what they're saying about this law? You're doomed, man. You don't want to do this. Don't you understand? Maybe you ought to do something different, But the decree was signed. The penalty was death. And I think the king knew it, Daniel knew it, God knew it, we know it from reading it. And yet Daniel's response, he prayed and gave thanks just as he had done before. You need to hear this. When your world changes, your worship shouldn't. If you are worshiping the one true God and you're giving him everything you've got and your world still gets turned upside down, the thing you shouldn't change is your worship. We all have bad days. And by most standards, Daniel is having one of those days. Everything turned on him. It's one of those days where it's easy to feel sorry for yourself, to get out of your rhythm, to blame your circumstances, to forget about God, to get angry, to get frustrated. Have you ever had one of those? Maybe you're having one of those right now. But to me, what's cool here is that Daniel didn't pray less. And you know what? We can see that. We say, yeah, you're in fear for your life. Surely you wouldn't pray less. But what we forget about is that Daniel also didn't pray more extravagantly. He didn't panic. He didn't suddenly become a monk. He didn't climb a mountain and meditate on this. He didn't make a big public spectacle. He didn't go out into the street and start yelling his prayers at God so that he could stick it to the government and show that he didn't care about them. He didn't do that. He didn't change that. He didn't go and hide in a sewer. He didn't pray quietly. He didn't pray angry prayers or blame God or blame others or anything else like that. He didn't let circumstances change his character. He was still saying, God is still good. He hasn't changed. God is still in control. That hasn't changed. And my worship's not going to change either. Even though my life seems rough right now and out of control right now and everyone's telling me how bad it is. Because Daniel's thanksgiving, it wasn't rooted in his physical safety. That's a mistake. It wasn't rooted in his possessions. All of those things can go away. But when you root your thanksgiving in God's sovereignty, it gives you peace for the bad days. It gives you peace when you face the lion's dens of your life. And I know some of you have those. You've been to the lion's dens called hospitals or courtrooms or family arguments or sleepless nights or bouts of anger. If you want peace for those sorts of things, don't give thanks for just your objects that you own. Don't give thanks just for your safety. Be thankful for those, but root your thanksgiving in God's sovereignty, and it will bring you peace. Gratitude, when it becomes a reflex, when it becomes your first thought, peace will become the result. See, Daniel didn't start praying when the trouble came. That's not when he started. He'd already been doing it for years. He knew that his consistency, the good things that he did in private day after day after day, he knew that if he was consistent in private, that when the challenges came in public, he would be prepared. He didn't want to have a panic-based faith. And maybe that's the sort of faith you've been struggling to maintain. And maybe, that's something you're dealing with. And it's definitely something I have dealt with, where you go to and you hit a crisis, and then you're going to be real faithful, and you're going to pray, and you're going to give thanks, and you're going to work through it. And then you forget. And then you get to the next crisis, and then you do the same thing, and you pray, and you work through it, and then you forget. You go crisis to crisis, but you're never feeling quite prepared when the crisis comes. You always got to play catch up. See, Daniel instead, he built habits of gratitude so that when the lions roared in his life, he had peace. He started there. So ask yourself, as I ask myself, and I did ask myself when I read this, Daniel prayed 3 times a day. I eat 3 times a day. Why am I so much more committed to eating and feeding my body than I am to praying and feeding my soul? I want to feed myself on gratitude. I want to practice it. I want to take it into my life. I want to make it part of who I am. I want to practice it until I build a spiritual muscle memory, until it becomes a reflex, because that's what Daniel did. Now let's cycle back, because again, we know that Daniel knew that the law meant death. He knew the lions were hungry. He knew that his action was going to be under close scrutiny now from all his enemies, but he just kept his habit of prayer and thanksgiving. And I think he did this because he knew something very special about God. He knew that God may not always do what Daniel thinks is right, but he will do what is right. He will not always do what I think is right, but he will do what is right. And that was a reason for Daniel to be thankful, and that's a reason for us to be thankful, to trust. The understanding of that was a mark of spiritual maturity. To know that you might face the lions, you might, but you're not going to face them alone, because you're bringing a lion of your own along to the den. You're bringing the Lion of Judah. You're bringing God himself along with you.